Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. Huge shout out and special thanks to the channel members. The manhwa starts with a man asking a woman named Katarina if she knows that Tillman Castle, the one we see off in the distance, has not fallen to any enemies even once over the span of 200 years. We learn the man's name is Simoon, and she asks what he's suddenly talking about, saying they need to get out of here. They're not supposed to be in this place to begin with. He tells her it's okay as no one will be here right now, and she tries to tell him that she needs to go finish her cleaning duties. He says that it won't take too long and he really wanted to show her the scenery from this place as it looks especially amazing at this time of day. She asks why it matters if it looks amazing, saying it's just the land of the nobles which they can't live in. Simoon then tells her that he might actually be able to buy a house there as he's going to get promoted to an intermediate mage this time around. He wrote a thesis on a new golem, and his seniors really liked it. They said if the elder acknowledges it as well, then he'll likely promote him. While it won't be a big house, it should be big enough that the two of them can live comfortably in, and we see her surprised by that and then he asks her to marry him. He says that she's suffered a lot for his sake this entire time, and starting now, he'll make her the happiest person in the world. She then gets a bit playful and says that before he says anything like that, he should probably become an intermediate mage first. He calls her mean, and she laughs, saying that she's just kidding and that she wasn't expecting that such a day would come for them, as she starts to lean on his shoulder. Simoon says that he thought they could truly be happy because he worked really hard for their happiness. But then the harsh reality kicks in, as the elder actually took credit for his golem work. Another man says that the thesis he wrote will change the world. The elder is talking to a duke and says that's all too flattering, and this is all thanks to his unreserved investment. Simoon's hearing all of his credit being stolen and starts to tune them out, but he's actually feeling anger, and he says that his beliefs were wrong. Even if he works hard for the rest of his life, he'll never truly be given credit, and he'll just keep rotting away. The duke then asks the elder what about the request he made, and the elder says he hasn't forgotten about that and asks the duke if he's really fine with her since she's just a woman of lowly birth. As some guards enter the room, Simoon turns, seeing them bringing in Katarina forcefully into the room. We see they actually roughed her up a bit, and she's very scared. Simoon's surprised as he didn't expect to see her here at all. He watches as they take her up to the duke, and Simoon starts to lose it, saying he's tired of them walking all over him. The duke said he heard she was pretty famous for her looks, and it's just as he expected. The elder says if she wasn't of lowly birth, she would have lived a vastly different life. Simoon starts to get pissed, saying that everything he had lived desperately to protect is being taken, and he asks how they can live with themselves so carefree when they are constantly destroying those around them. As we see him preparing some kind of magic attack with tears in his eyes, he starts to run at the two of them, telling them that he will not let them take Katarina from him. The elder starts to get annoyed while releasing lightning magic, calling him a brat, asking if he really doesn't know his place, saying he's nothing but trash, as he strikes him down with the lightning. Simoon's glasses then break, as he starts to fall over. Katarina starts to cry and scream, begging for him to get back up, and all he can do is stretch his hand out as she is being taken away from him. It goes black and then jumps to after some time skip, as we see Simoon on his knees, looking devastated inside of a prison cell. The only thing accompanying him are some rats, and his eyes look devoid of life. He says there was nothing he could do. He picks up one of the rats, causing it to start freaking out. We see he's even been marking his days in the cell as well. One of the guards then pokes him with a spear, and they laugh, saying it looks like he is trying to eat that mouse, and they said they should just leave him be, as even a mage of the magic tower is worth nothing in this state. They even start mocking him, saying if he just helps them summon the golem, they would release him immediately. Of course, Simoon doesn't reply, and they ask if he's even listening. The other one says he went completely crazy after that woman died. They decide to leave him alone and start discussing her death, informing us that Katrina committed suicide so she would protect her purity from the duke, as she was sold off to him. They say it's a shame as she was too pretty to die, and Simoon puts his thumb up to his mouth, biting his nail and pulling it off to the point where blood starts to spill out, and he apologizes to Katarina for letting such things happen to her. As the guards are walking back, they notice the mice acting up, and they say it's as if they're waiting for something because they're all looking up in anticipation. The other guard immediately realizes something is off, and he gets the other guard to stab one of them, and as soon as he does, we see a magic circle on one of the mice's bellies. They now understand what's going on and that this is bad because these are the mice from Simoon's cage, who we see using his blood starting to draw something on the floor, as he says he was just too weak to begin with, which he will change from now on. The guards quickly run over, telling him to stop what he's doing, and Simoon says that he refuses to stop as this is just the start. As his magic circle is now complete, he puts his palm on top of it, starting to absorb the life energy of the rats around him. Simoon says if only he had been stronger from the start, he never would have lost Katarina. Each one of the rats in their respective circles starts sacrificing themselves as the aura pools in the middle. An explosion soon follows as Simoon is now free from his prison cell, and we see he actually has a giant golem behind him now, which is what he based his thesis on that the elder stole from him. Simoon looks over at the guards, saying that was the same face that Katarina made, as we see them stricken with absolute fear, looking up at the golem. Simoon says that he tried thinking of reasons for him to still be alive, but now he understands what it is, as his golem swipes away at the guards, killing them, then explodes out of the wall. Simoon says that it's all because he needs to take revenge on the world where the two of them couldn't live a happy life together, as now he has even more golems wreaking havoc in the Mage Tower. As he's walking through the destruction, he tells Katarina there's no need to worry, as he won't be weak anymore. He'll obtain any power that he can get his hands on regardless of what it costs. He will make sure that he changes everything. Bro has some serious crazy eyes. We then see the Elder's lightning magic, as he is currently in combat as the shadow begins to loom over him as none other than Simoon riding the OG golem he made in prison. The Elder asks if he's out of his mind, asking why he would dare use black magic. Since he's one who serves God, why would he side with the demons? Simoon gives him a cold, icy stare, asking what any of that matters anymore. The Duke then also starts to run away, begging for him to spare him, as he's someone who can make him the master of this place, and if he spares his life, he'll do anything he wants. Simoon stretches his hand out, saying that he does not have the power he thinks he does, as he smites him down. He says that you can't bring back someone who's dead. He tells Katarina that this world that screwed them over will suffer his wrath all for the sake of her. Then it jumps sometime later to a man being knighted by the king, and we learn he is the hero named Lacan. The king begs that he save the world from the darkness, as it has now been some time since Simoon's rampage has begun, and he has been given the title of Demon King. He is trampling over all of their territories, slaughtering innocent lives, and he has already destroyed 2 kingdoms and 1 dukedom. The fate of the world all lies solely in the hands of Lacan, the hero, so he pleads with him once more to eradicate the Demon King and save the world, as we see their banners high in the sky. Lacan looks at his sword and raises it, and starts to give them a speech, saying, "Brave warriors of the divine Artinia Empire, the brilliant light of their empire has lost its power, and the giant shadow the Demon King has cast, is swelling up the Lode-Asia continent. However, they will not sit down for the sake of their families and for the sake of the world. Today, they will get rid of the Demon King and become the last hope that protects this world." We get a flashback of Katarina asking Simoon if he heard the news, asking how it makes sense to cut off a child's hand just for stealing bread. Simoon tries to tell her that she's speaking too loud and someone might overhear her. She says that the nobles can only give such harsh punishment so easily because they never have to worry about going hungry, asking why such a child needs to be punished so unreasonably just because of the social class he was born into. She has a sad look on her face, saying that even they weren't born in this position because they wanted to be either. Simoon looks at her full of hope and says perhaps a day will come when social status no longer matters and they can all live equal and free. She says his name, saying that a day like that won't come just by waiting for it. He asks what she wants him to do, and she says they have to be the change they want to see in the world. Otherwise, the children they'll raise later will go through the same things. His books fall to the ground as he starts to get embarrassed, asking what she means about the children they'll raise, saying they haven't even gotten married yet. She says that wasn't the important part of the message but says they're going to get married anyways. Simoon starts to get really panicked and says that they will, but he's not ready yet, and she asks if he's going to or not. He says of course he will. She sighs and calls him terrible. She's back to being playful, saying that he's so shy and she's probably the only person who would even marry him. The flashback ends, showing us his Demon King castle as he's standing before it. He calls out to Katarina, saying soon all of this will be over. It took a long time, but the world they wanted so badly will soon be a reality as we see Lacan's army in front of him. The soldiers all start to slowly advance their march, and we see them with expressions of dread. Lacan then calls out to Simoon, saying that the entire world has been filled with suffering, and he swears in the name of God and justice that all of his evil deeds shall be judged today. Simoon chuckles at first and then breaks into full-blown laughter that can be heard across the entire field. He asks if Lacan really plans to judge him with God and justice, asking if he really thinks he would fear some false god and their hypocritical sense of justice to begin with. Lacan tells him that he will make sure of it, as countless heroes of the Empire stand with him to bring judgment down upon him, and today they shall take down the demon and protect their world. As he leads in his troops, he yells, "Charge!" as they all start to fall in right behind him. As they start to get close to him, Simoon asks who they are to judge him, saying that he is the one who shall be the judge. The day he lost Katerina, justice died, as he slams his staff into the ground, creating a magic circle beneath it. As if time has frozen for the soldiers charging at him, Simoon says that he no longer believes in such illusions and that he'll show them the one thing he does believe in. All of the soldiers lose control of their bodies as we see their life force getting completely devoured by the power within Simoon's ritual, the same way he summoned the golems before, pretty much deleting the soldiers. The golems then rise up from the energy of their corpses and let out a roar that causes Lacan to put up his guard. Simoon then smirks at him, telling him to look, saying this is the day true justice is born. And he tells Lacan to cast away his deceptive faith, as today marks the beginning of a new era. One ruled by him, where he shall lay waste to all of the nobility in this world. As he has amassed an army of golems, one of them raises its fist into the air. We see it grab a fistful of soldiers, squeezing them into a human lemonade. The other soldiers, watching their comrades get squished, start to panic but realize there's no future if they back down here. Simoon's eyes look a little bit sad, and he calls them fools, saying they're nothing but garbage. They have nothing more than their social status to cling to if they're trying to resist real power. But he does not plan to spare them, as he will make sure they are all eradicated from this moment on. We see Lacan readying himself to dash in, calling out to Simoon, saying that he's unforgivable. A yellow aura imbues his blade as he leaps through the air, slicing through one of the golems and instantly destroying it. Simoon is surprised that he took it out with a single strike and says this must be the reason that he couldn't take down the Livia kingdom no matter how many golems he sent. It must have all been because of Lacan. Simoon looks at him with disgusted eyes, but Lacan's look like he's only doing what needs to be done. Simoon declares that he will make sure that Lacan dies today, and an all-out war ensues between Simoon and Lacan, with both their soldiers respectively being golems and humans. The battlefield then gets eerily quiet as we see all the broken weapons on the ground and all the blood. Now it's only Simoon and one of his golems left, and Lacan is so gassed out he's propped himself up against his sword. He looks back up at Simoon, saying he's going to put an end to this, as even the golem is starting to fall apart. Right behind Simoon, it begins to crumble. Simoon calls out to Lacan as Lacan raises his blade. Simoon tells him that he does not know how rotten the world is, and if it wasn't for him, as we see him crying and glaring up at him with eyes full of regret, he says he would have started everything anew after he cleansed the world. He curses him and declares that his entire bloodline shall spend their entire lives in suffering as his tears slowly turn into tears of blood. Lacan tightens the grip on his blade and gives it one final swing with all of the aura he has left, cutting off Simoon's head and even destroying the bits and pieces left over from the golem behind him. As Simoon's head floats through the air, he starts to recall Katerina, saying that when he smiles like this and is with her, all of her worries just wash away. This is when she's at her absolute happiest. As she's holding onto his face, we see her step on her tippy toes, giving him a kiss and telling him that she loves him. These were the moments he was thinking of in death. Then he jolts awake, immediately reaching for his throat, asking if it was all a dream since his head is still on his neck. He uses his forearm to wipe some sweat off his head, saying that he's also got a crazy headache, but there is no wound on his hand, and he wonders what's going on. As he's also woken up in an unfamiliar room, he wonders if maybe he's in a foreign country, asking how he even lived, saying even black magic can't bring someone to life. Because if that were possible, he would have done it already, so how is it that he is still here? He is then shocked by something, as we see a familiar knight on the wall. It's none other than a portrait of Lacan, and he asks why it's here. A butler then enters the room, calling out to the young lord and saying he's so glad that he's finally awake. He hugs him, saying that he's so relieved since he didn't wake up for 2 weeks. He thought they had lost the last of Lacan's bloodline. Simoon asks what he means by young lord, asking who the butler is. The butler starts to panic, asking if Simoon really doesn't recognize him. He falls to his knees, saying the accident must have damaged his memories and it's his fault for not taking care of him. The butler starts to cry, saying he'll tell Simoon some basic stuff to jog his memory since it might just be temporary, and he'll probably remember things once he starts telling him. He says that soon Simoon will become the lord of this place, and he's the successor of the Lacan Viscounty of the Baroque Empire, as well as the descendant of the great hero Lacan. His name is Luc de Lacan. Simoon is a bit taken aback, saying that means he died 500 years ago, and now he is his enemy's descendant. Almost half a century after his death, he sweats nervously and then immediately starts running, much to the surprise of the butler. The butler tells him that he shouldn't be moving around so much in that state, but of course, Si-moon ignores him, asking if he's really expected to believe this shit and if he looks like a fool. He grabs onto the door handle, saying it doesn't make any sense, and then slams it open to look out of the balcony. Si-moon yells, saying that there's no way this is real, but much to his surprise, what he sees is a giant towering golem decked out in armor. Si-moon loses his balance a little bit, asking if this is real, saying since he's seen it now, it confirms that everything he said was true. Looking at how intricate it is, he can tell that the weapon is far more advanced than golem magic. Magic that he could have only imagined is now standing before him. The butler calls out to him, and Si-moon asks what his name is. He says his name is Hans, and he is his personal servant. Si-moon then asks Hans what exactly he's looking at, and Hans says that thing is called a gigant. It is a bipedal humanoid weapon. Si-moon asks if it's made using golem magic, and Hans says that he's half right, because a gigant is made through scientific hex tech, what in the league? And paired with magic. Due to the advances in technology, unlike golems which are controlled from afar, gigants are driven by a pilot who remains inside of them. Si-moon finds it hard to believe that a person goes into it, and Hans says that is truly the case. Si-moon starts to think about it, saying that it requires a lot of advanced technology for someone to pilot it. But if Hans is telling him the truth, it is truly an amazing weapon, which means you're safe from external threats in battle and can even react quicker to events when compared to golems that you control from afar. It addresses all the problems he had with his golems in the past. Hans is just surprised that Si-moon seems so interested. Then Si-moon starts to walk back to his room. Hans calls out to him, and Si-moon stops moving, saying if it really exists, that means 500 years have truly passed, and he wonders why he had to be born as a descendant of his enemy. We hear them running around the house as Hans continuously yells his name. As Si-moon is chugging alcohol, he tells him that he can't push himself, as we see him standing on top of his desk, chugging it. Si-moon wipes his mouth, looking down at Hans, and says that he's a descendant of Lacan. Hans says yes, asking why it matters, and Si-moon then asks what's the big deal, he should be healthier than most people. He then starts to feel a sharp pain and drops to his knees, making Hans worried. Si-moon starts to gasp for air. Hans said he tried to warn him and he needs to be careful because of the curse. Si-moon asked what curse he's talking about, and Hans says he's somewhat expected it, but he really doesn't remember anything. Si-moon tells him to go ahead and spit it out. He starts to rant hella bad, and Si-moon tells him just to get to the point. Hans says that Lord Lacan was praised for his efforts in saving the world, but he soon passed away due to the Demon Lord's curse. Si-moon wonders what he is talking about, asking if he really did that. He recalls him saying that his entire bloodline shall spend their lives in suffering, and he wonders if that's what he means. But it was only something he said because he got pissed and now he finds it embarrassing, and he can't believe they thought it to be true. It jumps to the story being told again, how 500 years ago, the peaceful world faced a danger capable of wiping it out, aka Si-moon the Demon Lord. His dark magic could spawn golems that were more powerful than an army, and he wiped out countless soldiers with the flick of his hand. Just like that, it seemed like the Demon Lord would take over the world, but, thanks to the righteous warrior Lacan, the world found its peace again. However, the Demon Lord cast a curse on him right before he died, which caused the warrior and his entire bloodline to die a painful death at a young age. Si-moon closes the book and sighs, saying they just really spun it however they wanted. He didn't even cast a curse in the first place, asking if they really believe a curse can last that long to begin with. He then thinks about it but says it is his fault for losing and wonders why he had to be born as a member of Lacan's family in the first place, saying it feels like he was the one who got cursed here. He then starts to grab another book and then even another one, saying that since this is a second chance for him, he can't face Katarina like this. This rotten world existed for another 500 years, so he can't imagine how much more corrupted it is now. Because no matter how much time has passed, he's sure not all of his followers were wiped out, and he needs to learn more about this era for now. Because if he can reunite with his followers, he'll really change the world this time around. The next day, we see the Gigan is still outside the house, and it starts to take us to Si-moon's room upstairs as he puts another book down. He's once again chugging alcohol, saying there's no way he's gonna be able to find his followers. Putting his lack of followers aside, the people have almost forgotten about him entirely. He says it's too much, even if it's been 500 years, as there's not even a trace of his existence. On top of that, his body has no mana nor stamina, asking what he can even do with it. As he begins to walk, he twists his ankle and falls face first into the ground, asking what he's even meant to do. He clenches his fist out of regret and calls out to Katerina, asking if he's doomed to achieve nothing in this life, as he only wanted to create a world where everybody was equal in content. He then hears a man yelling for the young master, which surprises him. He sees the door open, and he wonders what's going on as it's so noisy. He heads outside on the balcony, and we hear a man asking how long he's going to avoid them. The man tells Hans and everybody else that we haven't been introduced to, that he and the other merchants will not take a step back until they have an audience with the young master. He is from the Alone Merchant Association, specifically the branch master named Darren. Simoon wonders if he's in debt and laughs, saying that Lacan's descendants sure have it rough. Darren tells him that it's 30,000 peso, and he borrowed that from them last year to develop a mine, but he's always avoided them. He asks if he even anticipated paying it back then, saying he can't live like this anymore. Hans tries to tell him that the young master must stay at rest because of his condition, and they'll figure out how to pay him another way. But Darren says no, as they must hear from the young master himself on the matter. Hans and everybody else start to look anxious, and Darren says based on their reactions, it seems like he won't be able to pay it back right now. And while 30,000 is not a small amount, he'll give them an offer, asking why they don't just hand over the gigan in their house. Saying it's probably not even worth 30,000 since it is second hand, so he's giving them a great offer. One of the men yells, saying that it's impossible as they only have 3 in their entire house, asking how they're meant to defend their territory like this. We are introduced to the knight commander named Rogers. Rogers says that he won't allow it and they must kill him if they want to take it because the gigants are crucial to their defense. Hans tells him to relax, and then we are introduced to the accountant named Dixon, who says that instead of taking the offer, they should just raise taxes temporarily. Hans sighs, asking if he doesn't know how their people are doing right now, as they can't have the little amount they have left leave. Dixon says the only way forward is to hand over the gigant, then Rogers continues yelling, saying he told him that would be impossible. Simoon starts to laugh, saying this is such a good household, Lacan would be rolling in his grave. Darren tells everybody to relax, saying he wants to seize that gigant and the manor, but he doesn't want people to think of him as the people who took from the great hero house. He starts to point towards the gigant, asking if he can just leave with it. Rogers asks if he's joking, saying he already told him, but Darren says that he's probably misunderstanding him, as he's not talking about the gigant but rather the magic tower directly behind it. They're all surprised by this, and Rogers says the magic tower is a better choice than the gigant. Even Hans says nobody goes there anymore. Dixon says they had some income from it as a tourist attraction before, but now it's useless. Simoon asks what he means as he starts to look over at it. He completely recognizes it as his magic tower, and he can't believe that Lacan built his house right where he killed him. Simoon says that 500 years ago, where the tower is currently situated, is where he used to live with Katerina. It was an old and worn down house, but it was still theirs, as in the end, it was where he made a lot of good memories. To them, it was a cozy resting place where they had dreams together. We hear Darren saying that the land around the demon tower has crossed into the territory of his company, but Simoon is just pissed, asking how dare they go after that place. Darren continues, telling them not to worry, saying with his company's diverse capabilities, they'll be able to make it into a popular tourist spot, which will also greatly enhance the economy of this region. He starts laughing. Dixon asks where to sign, but both Hans and Rogers seem skeptical. Then the door slams open, which startles all 3 of them, as Simoon starts to walk out, hella pissed. Hans asks if it's okay for him to walk, and Simoon glares at him, telling him to step aside. Darren then says it was hard to meet him, asking if he's already recovered, saying that his company will oversee the management of the demon tower. Simoon asks if he only knows how to yap and if he even knows what kind of place it is that he's trying to get. As we see, he's completely pissed. He continues glaring at Darren, asking how dare he try to take control of what he owns. Darren and his men start to get a little anxious, wondering why he's so fierce, as he's way too different from what they've heard. Darren goes to explain himself, but Simoon calls him a con man, telling him to shut up, saying after taking the land that stands at the center of his territory, not far from the main estate, he intends to expand his influence and authority under the guise of developing the area. We see Darren is physically surprised by this, and Simoon asks if he got it wrong. Darren immediately panics and tries to cover it up, saying that's too far-fetched, but Simoon calls him pathetic, saying that they can't even sell second-hand weapons, and he's even trying to take over their territory. He says in terms of incompetent people, he hates guys like him who are completely evil on the inside. Darren says he can't let him have the upper hand here, and in times like this, he needs to give an even stronger response. He yells, saying that the Lacan household is unable to repay its debt, and that's why he was trying to be considerate of him and came up with a proposition. His company has to get its money back somehow, asking if he's wrong. Simoon asks him why he thinks they aren't going to repay their debt, saying that he'll do it in 10 days, and they'll repay everything, including the interest. Then he yells, telling him to get the hell out of his sight, while releasing some serious killing intent towards Darren and his men, leaving them stunlocked by it. One of them hiccups out of fear, and Darren and his crew get on their wagon and leave. Darren tells him that he can't wait for him to try to put his money where his mouth is. Hans says these dudes all act the same, and Dixon is just surprised he's standing. Dixon calls out to him, saying that he can't believe what he just said to him. Simoon asks what's wrong, and Dixon, Hans, and Rogers all instantly salute him, saying they are so touched by his statement, and we see them crying. Hans says that he's so insightful that he saw through their plans immediately. Rogers says seeing him get angry to protect his ancestors and their honor was amazing. Simoon just asks what he's talking about, and Rogers says he didn't realize he took such pride in the household. He saw how that merchant bastard couldn't do a thing because of his fierce response, and at the time, he saw the image of the hero Lacan within him. Simoon just adores that they're comparing him to Lacan, saying he's definitely going to turn into the Demon King again at this rate. Hans then says he has a question, asking how he's going to intend to repay the debts. Simoon says that depends on how much 30,000 peso is truly worth. Hans says you can buy 10,000 sacks of wheat with that money, and it costs as much as a single unit of the new warrior class gigant. Right now, they don't have enough collateral to borrow money from a bank or other measures. Hans asks him if he has a solution. Simoon says that doesn't really help him, and if that's all he has to say, then he's to stand aside and says he'll repay the debt in his own way, and they can just sit back and relax. Simoon starts to go through the house, looking at the assets, seeing them empty, seeing that the house is falling apart, and their food situation is really bad. Back in his office, Simoon throws some papers into the air, asking if this is not the same household that killed the Demon King, and if that's the case, why the hell is there nothing here? Asking Hans if he stole it all with the others. Hans says no, asking why he'd even think of such a thing, and he'll understand if he looks at the genealogy. Simoon asks why he would need to see something like that, and Hans explains that after Hero Lacan killed the Demon King, he was bestowed the title of a marquis and built his territory within the south of the Livia kingdom. Simoon tells him to get to the point. Duke Baroque incited a rebellion against the Livia kingdom, and Viscount Lacan fought him because he couldn't stand the injustice being committed. However, the Viscount, who had been under the curse of the Demon King, suffered a crushing defeat, and after that, his title was revoked, and he was exiled to the borders, where he passed away due to the rapid deterioration of his health. Simoon says that makes it seem like Lacan didn't want to live by his tower, and he was forced here. Simoon says besides all of this, the financial situation is so bad, asking how it's been sustained for 500 years. Hans looks worried, saying that there's a reason for that. It's because his ancestors hoped for them to regain their former glory. Simoon asks what he means, and Hans tells him for the sake of making a comeback, his ancestors would do anything, even if it meant using all the assets, authority, and everything they possessed. They wanted to recover the reputation of this household, but due to the generational curse passed on through its members, no matter how hard they worked, their efforts were ultimately in vain, as this was how the household, once home to the hero who saved the world, met its downfall. He's not sure if he remembers this, but the reason he lost consciousness for more than half a month was due to a Gigan incident. He was working tirelessly to restore the household's reputation, and he wanted to prove that he had the qualities of a hero and pushed himself too hard. Simoon starts to think about it and then sits up out of his chair, walking over to the window. Hans tells him that they are stuck, and even as a butler of the household, he can't help him with anything, and he is truly sorry for that. Simoon then gets an idea, but Hans tells him that he's sure there's something they can do, because even if he has to give up his life, he'll find a way to accumulate the amount to pay back the loan. Simoon tells him there's no need for that, as he just thought of an idea. They just need to pay the money back regardless of how it's obtained. Then it jumps to a woman screaming, and Hans and everybody else in the manor are completely taken aback. Rogers is even crying, asking how this could be. Hans looks completely panicked, saying who would have expected him to take the statue of Hero Lacan and sell it off. What a move. Hans says the statue was here yesterday, and he wonders where it could have gone overnight. But then starts to wonder where the young lord is, saying he needs to tell him first. One of the guards quickly runs over, telling him that there's been a problem. Hans says if it's about the statue, that's not what he cares about, and he asks where the young lord is. The guard says that he left when the security was at its most vulnerable, and Hans falls to his knees, wondering just what the hell Luke is cooking up. We see him on a carriage, taking the statue of Lacan. The carriageman then calls out to him, saying if it's not too rude, he wants to ask a question. Simoon says sure but asks the dude who he is, and the dude laughs awkwardly, wondering if he forgot him. We are introduced to Philip, his guard knight. He asks him if he really plans on selling the statue. Simoon says yeah, and it should sell for quite a bit if he melts it down. Philip says that it might be important to him, but there is 500 years of history tied to the statue. Simoon puts his foot up on the carriage, asking him if 5 centuries worth of history is going to feed him. Philip says that he won't be able to pay off his debts just from selling the statue. Simoon tells him that it's just a small part of the plan. Philip says it's good that he has won, and he's sure everyone will understand as long as he repays the debts. He asks what his plan is. Simoon thinks about it, saying that he's going to use the money from selling the statue to gamble it all away to get the money. Philip freezes up and stops the carriage, saying he thought he had a plan, and this just sounds like a damn accident. Simoon calls him annoying, asking why he came with him if he's only going to lecture him. Philip says he's the one who dragged him out at the crack of dawn, and had he known this was his plan, he never would have left. He suggests that they turn back, beg for forgiveness, and come up with a better plan. Simoon calls him an idiot, and Philip asks what he means. Simoon tells him to think it through. If they turn back now, he would have to explain why he left with the great predecessor statue, and if his reason is that he wants to gamble, they would never forgive him. He's sure he'd be expelled from the household if he returned. This is a big shock to Philip, and Simoon says that he guesses they won't be able to do that since he is still the young lord. It would rather only be Philip to get kicked out of the house instead. He laughs, telling Philip to choose wisely and make sure to pick the better option for him, asking if he wants to become a vagrant without any money or if he wants to become a hero that will bring honor to the household. And once more tells Philip to choose wisely. Philip looks nervous, debating it, and reluctantly agrees, saying he'll just keep going the way they are. Simoon says that it's a good choice. Philip says that if he heard that his personality changed after waking up from his coma, he is now basically the devil himself. They finally make it to a port city as there are 5 minutes until the ship departs. The captain calls for the final onboarding process, and Philip asks if they are really getting on this. Simoon asks if he still wants to turn around, and Philip immediately tries to guide him on. When they step foot on the ship, it's time to go, as the captain rings the bell, telling everybody it's time to depart as the ship is finally setting sail on the seas. Sometime later at night, they arrive at a city named Lamar. They pull up to the port. A bag of money then gets dropped into Philip's hand, and he starts barking at the guy, asking him if this is really all he's going to pay. Simoon tells him to go ahead and guide the way, and Philip tries to tell him they could have gotten more. Philip says it's good enough, and the area they're entering has changed. Philip asks if he's been here before, and Simoon says it's only for a little bit, although it wasn't like this back then, as back when he remembers coming here, it was basically a deserted island because there was a kraken constantly blocking the seas. He sighs, saying it really has been 500 years. He decides to stop being gloomy and says it was a good idea to come here. Philip seems more excited now, saying he doesn't know why he came here, but it'll definitely be better than what he remembers, and this place is the second biggest city in the southern region of the empire. Things are constantly changing. It used to be an island where people couldn't reach easily because of sea monsters, but with the development of magic engineering, the place has slowly become a lot more populated, so naturally, the gambling scene is really big, asking Simoon if he's sure he'll be okay. Simoon tells him if he wasn't confident, he never would have bothered coming in the first place, as we see them in front of the casino. He tells Philip it's time to head inside, but Philip says to wait as he needs to get ready. Simoon asks what's the big deal, and Philip asks how he's so calm and if he knows how to guarantee a win in these games. Simoon says he guesses so because when it comes to gambling, your attitude is everything. We then hear a man saying that's not good, and it looks like he's won, as Simoon is currently losing all of his bets. He's asked if he wants to continue, and Simoon laughs nervously, wondering if this is how it's really gonna go. The man who keeps winning says that luck is smiling at him. Simoon tells him that luck is also an ability. The man laughs, saying that he sure is generous and that it's an honor to be able to play a game with such a cool young lord. However, it seems like he's out of money, asking if they should just end the game here. Simoon says they can't do that and tells Philip to exchange all of the remaining money into coins. Philip says that they can't, because if he loses this too, they'll be broke. Simoon tells him not to hold back and to bring it. The man on the other end of the table says that he's agitated and sure was lucky today. Simoon puts all of his coins up, saying he'll wager everything and go all in on this next bet. Philip cries, saying the family is doomed. The man on the other end of the table asks if he's serious, saying he's nervous because it's his first time having such a good game, but he must be fine with it. Simoon says that being anxious about it doesn't change their results. The other man says that's impressive, asking if they should confirm each other's cards, as we see him communicating with the woman behind Simoon. The man then turns his hand around, saying the goddess of luck is definitely on his side and starts to take all of Simoon's money. But Simoon tells him to wait, saying he needs to check his cards too. As he flips over his cards, he says surprisingly enough, this is what he has. The man looks confused, asking how this is possible. Simoon says that sudden reversals are the joy of gambling, and it was such an enjoyable match, as he shakes his hand out for the other man to shake. Philip starts to cry, saying he always believed in him. Cap. The dude on the other end of the table slams his fist down, saying there's no way, asking how he got those cards and what tricks he played. Simoon asks what he's talking about and says maybe he's talking about the people behind him and how they were informing him of his cards. The dude sweats nervously, wondering how he knew. Simoon asks if there was any way he wasn't meant to. All of the spectators nearby are his subordinates, and he knew they were secretly passing over cards, but the reason he kept falling for it was because he needed to touch every single one of the cards. He left small marks of mana on them, and if he can control the cards with the marks, then for him, who used to manage a golem army, managing cards is like a walk in the park, and he can easily win all these matches even without fancy tricks. Simoon laughs, telling the man to hurry up and acknowledge his loss. He says he thinks that today's business ends now and that everybody in the casino needs to show this young man some etiquette education, as they all start to brandish weapons. Simoon asks why all these bastards are the same even after 500 years, and while he doesn't have the same amount of mana as before, he has no issue with facing small fry like this. He starts to imbue energy into his hand, telling them to get started already, as they all start to leap at him. Philip tells Simoon to duck as he quickly unsheathes his blade, breaking some of the enemy's weapons and sending them flying away. He asks how dare they draw a sword towards the sole heir of the Lacan family and says now they must understand that means they are putting their entire lives on the line. The man looks terrified and says that he is committed to a sin worthy of death. Philip tells him to shut up, asking how he dare try to harm the young lord. Simoon then realizes something, saying this isn't quite that bad. It then jumps to later as Philip is carrying a bag of money, saying that this is quite heavy and definitely more than 10,000 peso. Simoon says obviously, and he looks back at Philip, saying he just thought of him as a porter, but he is way more talented than he expected. Regardless, today's earnings weren't bad, but it will be hard to use gambling houses after causing this chaos. He asks Philip if there is anywhere else to make money, and Philip thinks about it, saying that they could go to the Gigan Arena. Simoon asks what that is, and Philip says just like how there are arenas where humans used to fight each other, now there are arenas where Gigans fight one another. Depending on the match, the dividend rate differs, but if he does well, he can earn 30,000 or even more. Simoon says that he was interested in the Gigants, and if they are developed using golem magic, it might be helpful in guessing who will win. Philip tells him just to believe in him, as he was once a top student at the Imperial Military Gigan Academy. Simoon tells him to go ahead and lead the way, and Philip happily runs, saying that he should give him more credit. As they are walking towards the arena, they hear some guards shit-talking some people while kicking them. It's a whole group of children being stomped on by the guards, asking if they will only listen after they die. Philip asks how they could do something to someone so young, but Simoon is having different thoughts. He says even after 500 years, while the world has changed, there are still some things that haven't. Some things decay and rot even more as time passes. He starts to grit his teeth out of anger and then calls out to the guards, telling them to stop. But someone else beats him to it, saying to stop immediately. When the guards turn, asking who it is, a woman approaches, saying they are the royal guard, asking if they are not meant to protect the subjects, and asks why they are wielding violence against young children. She continues talking, but Simoon is experiencing a whole different set of emotions as they swirl up inside of him. When he looks at her, it looks like none other than Katerina. She says the children have the right to be protected too, and he wonders if maybe she was reincarnated as well. The guards say that even if she may be a princess, there's no point resisting what they are doing, as the count himself has issued the order. Surely, she knows how restless the people have become as a result of all their refugees. The princess asks if they really believe that locking people up like cattle in an environment not suitable to live in is right. They are innocent children who have lost their nation and their family, and if they were guilty, she shall be the first to be punished instead because she is the princess of the Volga kingdom. That means she is one of the refugees seeking shelter here. The guards say that if she continues to do it, it will be nothing but trouble. They are not doing this because they want to either, but because they were ordered to. Philip says the situation is getting serious, asking Simoon if this is okay. Simoon asks if he knows who that is, and Philip says, of course, that she is quite famous in the Volga kingdom as the princess who cares little to nothing about nobles' gazes. He doesn't know why, but he's heard their kingdom fell to ruin, and he never thought he would see a princess like this. We learn her name is Reina. Simoon is just still completely dumbfounded. No matter how he looks at her, that is definitely Katerina, and he wonders how she looks the same even if she did reincarnate. The guards call out to Reina, saying that they apologize, but they cannot allow her to do this, as they grab onto her arms. She asks what he is doing, and he raises his arm, pushing her away with his hand, causing her to fall. Something snaps inside Simoon, and he immediately leaps at the guard, telling him to get his filthy hands off her. We see his knuckles are bruised, and he says even if time passes and the world changes, people need to be taught a damn lesson every single day, as he is mercilessly beating this man. He says these pieces of filth will only learn with pure violence, and no matter what he does, they will always remain, which bothers him a lot. Reina then grabs onto his arm, begging him to stop. She says there is no need to go this far. He goes to call her Katerina but stops, one of the guards asking how dare he attack one of them. As he draws his weapon, the guard says it seems he does not fear the imperial law. Philip asks him if that law of his is more important than his life, as we see his blade to the man's throat. The dude starts to choke up, then grabs his friend, running away, saying he will make them regret this. Philip clicks his tongue, saying this is straight out of a Chinese manhwa, and he's surprised they didn't say he was courting death. Simoon then calls out to Reina but calls her Katerina instead and asks if she is hurt, saying he is sorry he lost his mind for a second and he should have helped her. She says she is sorry but asks him who he is, and he is confused. He asks her what she means. She is obviously a little scared by his actions, and he says he might look different, so she won't recognize him, and he will tell her everything now. She says it will not be necessary, asking what the difference is between him and the guards when they both resort to violence. He tries to explain himself, but she says more importantly, he seems to be mistaking her for someone else, as her name is not Katerina, and that it is Reina, as he must have heard the guards say. Philip says that it seems the young lord made a mistake, and they are not really suspicious people. As he starts to yap to her, Simoon is lost in thought looking at his hands, and his eyes start to become full of sorrow. He says he endured countless hours alone, even though he knew she would never come back, and yet he almost fell apart just because they look very similar. We then hear an older man asking Reina what she is doing here. He says he told her that there was something important scheduled today, asking if she knows how hard it was for him to find her, and this is her butler, Victor. She goes to explain it to him, but Victor gets pissed, saying she better not have been fighting the guards again. Then Philip sees Simoon asking who they are, and he tells him that even if it's not their first time meeting, he apologizes, but due to various situations, things are quite tense, so it would be great if they didn't get too close to the princess. Simoon says that's stupid, saying even though he did misunderstand the situation and escalated, he helped them out in the end, and he didn't do it to expect anything in return, but at least she could say, thank you. We see Reina thinking about it, but Simoon turns, telling Philip it's time to go, and both she and Victor watch them leave, saying they should go as well. Reina says he's right, as she didn't actually thank him. Then we are taken to the Gigan arena, which doesn't look big enough to hold those giant guys, but we'll see. The shoutcasters say the match is getting really intense while we see Philip and Simoon in the crowd. They make their way to their seat, and Simoon says the fight is over, as we see one of the Gigants falling over due to a strike. As it topples down, the crowd starts cheering, saying that Adolf wins. Philip can't believe that he got it right again, saying at this rate they'll pay off all of their debt and strike it rich. Simoon says this is very easy, and he guesses it's because Gigants are made based on golem magic, and he can easily determine the victor because he can see their flow of mana. The shoutcasters say the next match is probably going to be a bloodbath, as it's a Gigant named Savage versus one named Sting. Philip says he can probably predict this next one as well, asking how Sting, who has 1 win and 5 losses, could possibly win against Savage, who's at 28 wins and 2 losses. Simoon says although it's possible to win despite such a disadvantage in strength, it seems this match will be trivial. The shoutcasters then start introducing the fighters, as we see one of them with their axes crossed, and we are introduced to the dual axe wielding savage being piloted by a man named Brian. Simoon is surprised by this one, as when it walks out it is called the Lucky Gigant. The shoutcasters say it was given a miracle win last time. Philip says it's quite a pity that he got a lucky win because now he's facing Savage, and we are introduced to Sting, and the pilot is named Karen. Simoon seems interested, saying he needs to go all in on Sting. Philip asks why, saying Savage is guaranteed to win this match. What Philip's eyes say is a different story, because he can see the aura and he can tell that Sting is much more capable than they've led everybody else to believe. Savage's axe starts to fly through the air. As we see Sting block it, the shoutcasters wonder what's going on, seeing that Sting is putting on an unexpected performance. Everybody's expectations of a painful defeat are, low-key, being blown out of the water as Sting blocks every one of Savage's attacks. Savage laughs, saying he thought they were just an amateur, but it seems like they've got some skills. However, it's still far from enough, as he comes in with a devastating blow that sends one of Sting's arms flying. The spectators are surprised, even Philip is saying there's no way this is happening, but Simoon is confused. Sting has the upper hand in terms of mana flow, yet they're not using their mana at all. Savage starts to laugh, telling Sting to get up, as their legs are still attached, and if they don't plan to fight anymore, all he can do is offer them an easy way out as he raises his axe into the air. Philip starts to panic, asking what they're going to do as all their money is about to be lost. Everyone watches as Savage's axe comes in directly towards Sting. Sting's eyes start to light up as they finally use their mana, but maybe it's too late. Savage's axe comes straight into the ground, shattering it. But then, we see there's actually nothing underneath. Sting asks if he's aware that you can adjust your bet in Gigant matches up until 30 seconds into the match, and now that the time frame has passed, they can't afford to pay for any more repairs than this. Sting sticks their hand out as a magic circle forms and uses an ability called Fire Blast, straight up flamethrowering Savage, lighting him ablaze. The shoutcasters wonder how this could be, saying they have an unprecedented event happening here. Their champion, who bested the odds of 20-1 with pure skill, has now been crowned as Savage's Gigant falls to the ground. Philip starts to scream, saying that he believed in them the entire time. But Simoon is just surprised that they actually used magic, saying that there's no way this should be possible. Philip asks what he's so confused about, saying Sting's writer, Karen, must have just been a rune knight. It's not too common to see Gigantes using magic, but they must have been hiding their strength to raise the odds. Simoon says that's not what's important. The fundamental theory behind using magic through weaponry is something he developed, and that method, no matter how much time has passed, cannot be replicated by others. That's all because it's a process he completed with the use of black magic. We are taken to the hangar for the Gigantes. Philip asks what they're doing there, saying they need to head back as soon as they can. But Simoon tells him to shut up, saying that he's busy thinking and Philip's not helping at all. We then hear Victor telling Reina that she can still change her mind, asking how she's going to go into a match with a Gigant like this. He says this isn't even a fight she should have accepted in the first place. Reina says that a mercenary like Andre would have no trouble riding Mur to fight the Count's Gigant. Both Philip and Simoon wonder what exactly is going on. Victor continues, asking why she would agree to such a rash duel, saying that she'll need to marry the Count if she loses. This is not a decision she can take lightly. She says she made her choice carefully. If she didn't accept, countless refugees would starve to death. In order to save everybody, this is the only way. Victor asks how sacrificing her future can be a viable option. Especially because her Gigante is falling apart, it's obvious that she's going to lose. Yet she wants to protect the refugees so much, she's neglecting her own life. He asks why she has no will to protect herself. Simoon tells Philip they should go, saying he's finished here in the hangar, and they should just head out. As he's walking, we see Mur in the background, Reina's Gigante. He says she's definitely not Katarina, and he doesn't need to get involved. We then hear a man saying that the princess is just selling herself off, causing Simoon to stop in his tracks. The man continues, saying the Count is a man who stops at nothing to get what he wants, and he's threatened the refugees many times before. Without her, the refugees will truly be helpless. Now, if she isn't completely changing the Mana Stone, the Gigante won't even be operable. Even if it were, the difference in specs compared to Count Monachi's Gigante will be too large to put up a good fight. He tells her she should just listen to her butler. Reina says she's aware of that, but she can't give up. If she loses without trying, and we see her starting to shake and cry, she asks who else will stand up for the weak. Simoon walks back over, asking if he could take a look. Reina turns, surprised, and Simoon says that the mana stone inside of this Gigante can definitely still be used. Victor draws a sword out of nowhere, telling Reina to stay behind him. He says this is too convenient to be coincidental, and they could be assassins sent by Count Manaki. Simoon starts to get pissed, asking why this old dude is getting on his nerves. But Philip laughs, telling him to put away the sword, and introduces Simoon as Luc de Lacan, the 15th descendant of the Lacan family and the current lord. Victor asks how he's meant to trust such words, and Reina just tells him to stand down. She starts to walk towards Simoon and says she wants to apologize for their meeting before. It seems he's overheard her situation, and she's embarrassed to admit it, but they have no other way. She'd like to ask him to help her. Rather, she begs him. Simoon says alright, as we see him holding onto a tiny dagger. He says to ensure he is not mistaken this time, he'll make sure to show off his skills, as he starts to walk towards the pilot area on the Gigante. The engineer sighs, saying that Gigante repairs can't be done by just anyone. His partner says there's a reason they are called Iron Mages and that he's just going to damage the Gigante further. He can't believe that Mur is subjected to such a fate because some noble has a big ego. Philip gets close to both of them, asking if they would like to make a bet with him. He bets 10,000 peso that his young lord can easily fix the Gigante that these two are unable to. They ask why they would even take an offer like that, and Philip laughs, saying it just means they're scared. The engineer says they'd better double the stakes because he's in. Reina then asks Philip a question, and he panics since he's talking to a woman. She asks if a tool like that is typically used to fix Gigantes, as they've noticed that Simoon is holding onto a dagger. Philip starts to sweat nervously. Simoon then swings, only hitting his hand. When blood starts to fly, Philip is confused and starts to scream out in panic, but Simoon sighs, telling him to just keep watching. His blood starts to pour on the mech. Philip wonders if he just watched his own young lord off himself in front of all these people. But little by little, magic circles start to form all over the perimeter of Mur, as if they were bending to Simoon's will. Everything starts to coalesce into the middle of the engine-like structure, getting it running. Soon, a red aura starts to swirl around Mur. Simoon stretches his hand out and screams, telling the Gigante to arise, as we see the magic circle that he has made completely repair Mur using his own blood. We get a flashback to one night at the Demon King's castle, and we see Simoon tired as there are golem corpses all around him. He stops moving as we see him standing before one, and he asks if it's really planning to fall in such a place like this, saying that it is an immortal being who is meant to lead his enemies to hell. He starts to release his aura, telling it to answer his summons once more. The golem's body begins to regenerate itself by taking from the other fallen golems around him. This one looks like it's juiced up quite a bit as it lets out a roar. The flashback ends with Mur opening its eyes as the Gigan is now ready to be piloted. Philip says, as expected of the young lord, he believed in him from the very beginning. Both of the engineers fall to the floor, saying this is not possible. Even Reina and Victor are surprised, asking how he could do such a thing. One of them says that they can't believe he was able to revive a dead magic crystal, and they've never heard of the existence of such a mage in their life. They claim the continent, rather the entire world, would be amazed at this historic event. Philip, all happy, walks up to Simoon, saying there really isn't anything his young lord can't do, and he'd believe him even if he said he could make a golem out of rocks. Little does he know he can. One of the engineers says that's impossible, and it must be some kind of trick. Drawing a magic circle with blood and activating it sounds a lot like black magic. Philip starts to get pissed, asking how they dare claim that the sole heir of Lacan is using black magic. The engineer says that no matter how he looks at it, that's the only possibility. Simoon says that it's fine as he'll explain the truth to them. Then he activates his porn-level acting, saying that it's a top-secret technique passed down by his family, which has been kept hidden for nearly 500 years. The engineers wonder what kind of swordsman family would have such a secret technique, but Reina tells them that's not what's important. Even if it were black magic, he has just saved countless lives, and she doesn't know how she could ever repay him for this. She'd like to apologize again for what happened last time. He tells her it's fine and it's no surprise that she misunderstood. She grabs onto his hand, saying that he was hurt because of her, and she would like to treat him at the very least. He tells her if that'll put her at ease, then to go for it. A man then quickly starts running into the hangar, saying that there's a huge problem. Victor asks what the big deal is for him to come in screaming like this, and the dude says that he's gone. He searched the entire waiting room and all over the lodging, but he can't find the rider and Dre anywhere. It then jumps to some men talking. One of them is eating while the other says that they succeeded in winning over Andre, so now the princess doesn't have any riders she can use. It seems they somehow succeeded in repairing their gigant, though. The man puts his glass down, saying he thought they told him that it could not be activated. When the other dude says that he thought that'd be the case, the man slams his glass on the table and slaps the dude, knocking him to the floor, saying that he hates apologies the most because it means that he's made a mistake. The man pleads, saying if he just gives him one more chance, he'll make sure, but the man who slapped him tells him to get lost as he is fired. We are finally introduced to Count Manhwa. Manhwa asks his people if there have been any other variables, and they immediately panic, saying none. Manhwa says there can't be even a sliver of probability not until Reina is completely his, and that soon everyone will know just what kind of person the master of Manhwa is. It jumps back to the arena for the final match of the day, and it's Mer versus Achilles. The shoutcasters say that there is an overwhelming difference between the two. Count Manhwa's Achilles is the lamer fiefdom's champion, boasting 70 victories and not a single loss. They don't know what Mer is prepared to do against this champion, but it probably won't work. There's another problem here as Mer is nowhere to be seen in the arena, and maybe they have abandoned the match. The crowd starts to wonder if Mer got scared and ran away, telling them to give their money back. Manhwa laughs, asking if Reina has given up because she doesn't have a rider, saying that's why she should have just quietly accepted his marriage proposal. He plans to show her what happens when she bruises his pride. It jumps back to the hangar when the assistant was crying about Andre. And it seems Count Manhwa has tricked them. Victor says that Andre is a loyal vassal, asking if he's really meant to believe they've been betrayed. The assistant says there are people who've seen him entering the Count's camp, and even without stealing Andre away, there's still a difference in strength between their gigants to begin with. Reina starts to panic and get very anxious because this means they won't be able to fight. Simoon says that if she cannot participate, that means that she's going to be forced to marry Manhwa, asking if he's wrong. He says if that is truly the only outcome, then this might be too meddlesome, but he believes that he can help with this as well. Reina asks how he's going to do that, and even Philip says it's not that he doesn't believe him, but surely he hasn't forgotten the accident that occurred the last time he tried to operate a gigant. Simoon tells him not to worry as he's got a plan. We then hear Mer's footsteps as the crowd and the shoutcasters start to feel a little relieved, saying they thought that Mer had given up on the fight, but it's finally walking into the arena just at the last second. We see Manhwa a little frustrated, saying that he thought there were no riders left on the princess's side. His man says he's sure there weren't any more. Manhwa asks if that means she hired a mercenary, saying that can't be, and he's sure that the pilot doesn't understand the significance of this match. Still, he can't believe there was someone so far gone that they dared to take the princess's side in his territory. We see Reina and Victor finally made it up to the viewing platform, and she asks if the match has started yet. Victor says no, and they're luckily not late. Reina says it may be a relief but asks if this is truly okay. At a glance, the difference between the gigant's size is incredibly big, and the opposing rider is also the lamer territory's champion. We then see it's actually not Simoon in the gigant, and he says it'll be okay. Although he looks rather simple-minded, it turns out that the man inside of the mech is none other than Philip. Simoon compliments him, saying that he's actually very skilled. Philip just wonders why he's doing this. The shoutcasters say that now that the gigant Mer, who they all expected to forfeit, has arrived in time, it means the match can soon begin. The spectators wonder if this means that a gigant that small is really going to fight back against Achilles, and another bursts out in laughter, saying he can't believe this. Soon, everybody else starts laughing as well, saying they should have just ran away, and they can't believe they're calling something so shitty a gigant, asking if it's even able to move. Achilles says that he'll applaud the fact that he didn't run away, however, he must be aware of what the match entails, as he has no intention of going easy on him. Philip says that he won't know until he sees it in action. Achilles says he'd like to put that confidence of his to the test, as he slams his mace forward directly at Mer. Philip manages to sidestep it, saying as expected, his power really befits his size. However, that doesn't mean he's going to win, as he leaps into the air. He says that even though Achilles is big and strong, it doesn't mean he's actually a good fighter. But Achilles turns to him and immediately tries to counter-swing while he's still in the air. Philip's surprised that he's actually really quick, unbefitting of his large size, and has to duck underneath the attack. Achilles says he didn't expect him to dodge it, but now, after seeing what he has, he can tell that his confidence was all baseless. Philip says that was low-key dangerous, and he starts to sweat, saying this might be pretty bad. The fight continues, as the shoutcasters say that Achilles is attacking over and over, unleashing a flurry of blows towards Mer, but, of course, there's been no substantial damage so far. Achilles' pilot starts to get annoyed. He swings again directly toward Mer's head, but Philip manages to matrix underneath it. The shoutcasters say they thought this would be a very quick match, but it turns out that's not the case, as Mer has not been hit a single time so far. Victor says they can't win by running forever, and Reyna snaps at him, saying he can't act like this because Philip is a strong knight. Simoon just sits there, saying he can hear them whispering, and while Philip's faced countless knights before, so there's no doubt that he is a good knight, he'll need to educate him later, because all he's doing currently is running away. Philip wonders if this dude is ever going to get tired, then immediately gets into a stance, unleashing a sneak attack, swinging directly down Achilles' chest. Achilles blocks it with his weapon but freezes up for a second, only to unleash a killing intent, asking if this means that he's finally ready to fight properly, and Philip says, "Hell no." Achilles raises his mace into the air, saying that he's going to give it his all from here on out. The shoutcasters say this is actually his finishing move, asking if Mer will be able to dodge this one as well. Philip looks up, saying that this isn't going to be pretty, as an explosion soon follows from where Achilles attacked. Due to all the dust that has been sent flying, they can't really see anything, but Achilles knows what's going on, and he says that's unbelievable because he knows that Mer was not far enough to evade that attack, asking how he did so. Philip says that Uncle Rogers is going to kill him if he finds out, but he has no other choice since he's got to win, since the young lord has his hopes on him, and that Achilles is going to regret this moment for the rest of his life, because he's going to make him unleash his full power as the aura around Mer begins to change. Achilles' pilot laughs, saying that he's a little excited by the aura he's producing, and he had a feeling from his movements, but it seems like he's finally met a good opponent. Manhwa then starts to chime in, asking him what the hell he's doing. Achilles' pilot starts to panic, and Manhwa asks if he's really struggling against a piece of junk like that, asking if he knows the consequences if he loses. The pilot says that he's sorry to disappoint him, but from now on, he'll show him a satisfactory performance as he's adjusting the output on his gigant. We see it going full throttle as he's releasing his aura as well. Achilles immediately widens his stance, and he says that he would like to have another fair duel someday else, because that day's not today, as he leaps off the ground, dashing straight in towards Mer with his weapon pulled back. Philip says that he's going to be too busy to accept another fight after this, and Achilles slams down on where he was standing, only to be surprised that Mer didn't get caught up in the attack, and we see that his arm has actually been completely severed, making him confused on what just occurred. Achilles says that this aura and speed is no doubt starting to bring back memories, and he disappeared 3 years ago, but he is the undefeated legend of the Gigan arena called the Black Knight's Phantom Sword. As Philip dashes back through Achilles, slicing the mech straight through the middle. The shoutcasters are completely amazed by this, saying that something unprecedented has occurred, as Achilles has been made inoperable in a flash, and that Mer is now the winner, and they can't believe that the underdog actually took a W. The crowd starts to go crazy, chanting his name, and even stomping their feet. Achilles' pilot laughs, saying he didn't think he'd get to meet the Black Knight once again, and Philip asks if he knows him. The pilot says that he had the chance to fight him in the Royal Arena 3 years ago, and he disappeared randomly after setting such an absurd record, asking why he's in a place like this. Philip says he's the Black Knight, so it's normal for him to help anybody in need, and the pilot laughs, saying he guesses he's right. Philip apologizes, asking him if he can keep the fact that he's the Black Knight a secret, and the pilot says he's fine with that as he's getting fired anyways, and Philip says, "My bad, bro." Victor begins to cry, telling Reyna that they won, while Simoon just expected as much, and Reyna just wonders why Victor is crying. Simoon starts to smirk while looking over at Reyna, saying he guesses this much should be fine, and then he heads back down towards the hangar, saying that he can finally leave this place with a lighter heart. He goes to the betting area, looking up at the odds, and he starts to smile, saying gambling is all about the flow, and his odds were 21 to 1, and he bet the whole 10,000 they've made until now, and that it sure is an easy world to make money. And he even shows us how much they started with, how much they made from gambling and betting, giving them a grand total of 210,000. From the 3,000 they started from, they head back to the port of the city, and Simoon says that, again, he guesses it's time for them to leave. Reyna says that they can't thank him enough for everything that he's done. Simoon says there's no need to worry about it. All they did was help out people who needed it, and she says that it must have been difficult for him. She wishes that she could have shown him proper gratitude. He laughs, saying it's okay, and he thinks she's given plenty. If they hadn't met him, They never would have earned this much to begin with. To be honest, he would like to stay here longer, but since they caused a huge scene, it would be better to leave before his identity is revealed. She says that now she can see the bigger picture and hopes that things haven't become too complicated for him. He says there's no need to worry, though he thinks it would be better for her to leave the area as soon as possible. Because if Monica is willing to do anything, he won't give up so easily, and it's likely that he's already scheming his next set of plans. Victor says that he is definitely correct and they need to leave while he has no reason to keep them here. Simoon says they understand that she's worried about the refugees, but even if she stays here, there's nothing she can do to help every one of them. For a better future, he thinks it would be wise for her to take a step back for now. She says that she's aware, however, for her, that would be difficult. Although she may seem stubborn and ignorant right now, she can't just leave her people without someone to rule or rely on. Even if it's just a little more, she wants to help them as much as she can. Simoon starts to smile, saying he sees, and he shakes her hand, telling her to stay safe. She says that she hopes his journey is safe as well. He says he's looking forward to when they meet again. As they start heading back, Philip says that since he's managed to solve such a large issue, all that's left for him is to return and be crowned a hero. But he wonders why Simoon brought those awful engineers along, saying he should have just gamed them for their money. Simoon says that he thought he told him they didn't have any iron mages within their lands, and Philip says technically they don't. Simoon asks how they're meant to fix the gigant without them, and Philip says he thought he'd fix it like he did Myr. Simoon sighs, asking if he knows how to restore a repaired mana stone on his own, calling him stupid. Simoon says there's a reason why he's still at the bottom of the chain of command, and he tells him to stop yapping and just protect them. Philip starts to cry, saying that bro is so mean. Back at the Lacan estate, we see that Hans is stressed, yelling, asking somebody why they were here taking their stuff. It's none other than Darren, and Hans says he thought they had time. Darren says he's glad he brought it up the time, and he believed him when he said he'd pay off such a great debt, yet he betrayed them all and ran away in the middle of the night, asking why he has to wait. Philip then appears behind him, calling out to him, scaring him, and Darren asks him who he is. Philip introduces himself, saying he's the young lord's escort knight. Darren looks around, wondering where Simoon is but doesn't see him and asks Philip why he's alone and where he is. Philip says he's actually here to deliver something as he opens a chest full of gold. Darren says there's no way, as it hasn't even been a week yet, but he already managed to earn over the 30,000 he owes. The engineers are even calling Philip master, asking if this is fine and if this is enough as they take a lot of the money out of the carriages. Philip calls them fools, saying surely they can see that Lord Darren is busy and they need to hurry up and load it into his carriage. They start picking up and moving it. Darren tells him that there's no need to rush and he'll wait to receive it directly from the young lord. Philip starts to smile and pulls out a whole essay. He clears his throat and starts reading it, saying he assumes he's already planning his next move. Darren asks what he's talking about, and Philip says this is a message from the young lord to him. He says that now that they've paid off their debt, he is now considered a trespasser, and he suggests that he prepare himself if he intends to stay and make a scene. According to the imperial noble laws, nobles who have their territory or a building under their care trespassed upon have the right to execute said trespassers. So unless he wants to be split into two, he suggests that he returns now. That was the end of Simoon's message. He added a little extra bit, saying he'll give him 3 seconds to leave. Darren shivers and immediately gets on his wagon and starts hauling cheeks, again telling them that they are courting death. Philip says at least he listens and he understands how scary the young lord is, and we hear Rogers calling out to him. Philip says everybody can be happy as they have finally been able to do what they wanted. But Philip sees that the reaction's not going as planned, as Rogers is running at him, all pissed, asking how dare he sell the statue of Master Lacan. Even Dixon says he's not going to get away with this. They start roughing him up, asking where the young lord is, and Philip says to just give him a second to explain. Rogers says to just answer the question and not make any excuses. Philip reluctantly agrees and tells them exactly where it is. It jumps to some crows in the air. We see he's returned to none other than his own castle as he opens the gates. He heads inside, saying this place is a complete mess, but that makes sense, as there's no way they would have taken good care of it. He snaps his fingers as the lights start to cut on. He says he should just be thankful that it's still standing after 500 years, take a shot anytime the years are mentioned. He looks over at a staircase, and he says this place is filled with memories of Katerina. He starts to smile, saying no matter what happens, he'll protect it. However, this is what's important. As he heads to his library, He puts his hand on one of the bookshelves and sighs, saying that he hopes it still works. He starts to imbue his aura into it. We see it activating some kind of hidden passage as the door opens. He says that he knew it would still work because the dwarves are perfect craftsmen, and it low-key works better than he expected, though. He heads inside, saying it's time to rightfully take what's his. Simoon starts to head down a staircase, saying the best way to fight off a curse is to have a stronger mana pool than the curse itself. That's advice he's heard a very long time ago, and at the moment that's the only solution he has. He starts to go even deeper as he has to push open another door using his mana, and as it creaks open he says it's been 5 centuries since he was last here. He tells somebody they did great protecting the house, and we see it's none other than some kind of core in a jar, and he says that he does like that they are quieter than before, but still it's been quite a while. And we are introduced to the demon, Hutrath. He explains back when it was actually the territories of the demons itself before he claimed the castle was his. He had to fight his way through using his magic as we see him putting his hands up casting a spell called Death Bullet, disintegrating the demons launching at him. As soon as he's done he starts heading forward, and he's asking somebody if they are the ruler of this place. A woman sighs, saying that she heard that he took down several fortresses already, so he was some 8th circle old geezer. We are introduced to the high demon Hutrath, but she's surprised that he's young, saying that she's quite disappointed, though it is impressive for a human since she's touched by his hard work she'll show him some mercy. She tells him that he can ask her anything she wants, and it's only right that she satisfies curiosity before he goes. He says that she is the chattiest demon he's ever met, asking if the demon's rank increases the more that they yap. She starts to get annoyed, calling him a fool, saying that she showed him mercy, yet he just rejected it. It seems that he's got quite arrogant after defeating some lower level demons, however she will show him that the demons here are nothing like the ones he has fought up until now. Simoon tells her not to worry, as he's not dumb enough to go into a battlefield all on his own as his golem boys break through the wall. Hutrath is surprised to see golems, and the fight begins between the higher tier demons and Simoon's army. Simoon also intervenes by cutting some of the demons in half, and Hutrath as well to his golems. After a bit of fighting, they are now standing before one another, and they have their WWE stare down before leaping at each other to land a finishing blow. We see an explosion, and then shortly after, the remnants of the fight, and Hutrath asks what he intends to do by converting her into demonic energy, asking if he's really trying to change the world. He tells her that she doesn't need to know, as he starts to sap all the energy out of her, turning her into a pure core of demonic energy. He says the whole process of taking her down was many times more difficult than the other guys, and that if you absorb powerful demonic energy incorrectly, it might throw you into a rage, and he has witnessed people turn into horrifying creatures because of that. He couldn't absorb it because of the high risk back then, but when he had learned the correct method to safely absorb it, he had already reached the 9th circle, and he didn't need it anymore. He didn't expect to use it now, as he never expected the reincarnation to happen. His chest starts to hurt hella bad, as he stumbles, losing his balance, coughing up a storm. He then opens his eyes, surprised, as he is now inside of a different area, aka the mind's realm. He says it looks like he wasn't eaten by the demonic energy, and when he looks up, he sees none other than Hutrath sitting off in the distance as she turns, looking at him. She asks him who he is, and she stands up, exuding some intense pressure. Simoon says that it will be hard to withstand with his current body. Even though it's been so many years, she still has a ton of demonic energy. He goes to tell her that he says he's come here to borrow her power, but she immediately starts to realize who he is as she leaps forward, grabbing him by the throat, putting him on the ground, saying that he's so weak now that she almost didn't recognize him, asking what he's doing here. He says that he needs to borrow her vessel, and she laughs, asking if that's the case, and wonders if he's even going to have the power to do it, because she doesn't think it's possible, but the body as weak as the one he is currently residing in. She says she can't believe that her enemy, who's trapped her here for so long, has walked in such a pitiful state on his own, and now he wants her strength, asking if he also finds it kind of ironic. Simoon realizes that she could break his neck at any moment, and he grabs onto her wrist, asking if she's really okay with this. She's confused, asking what he means, and he says that he came here with a decent proposal. Yet, she's just going to kill him off without hearing it. And he knows that she'll want his whole body as a magic supply, so she won't hurt him. She starts to laugh at him thinking it's worth her time, then lets go of him, saying that she'll at least recognize his bravery, and starts to smile, asking if he really thinks he can withstand her strength with his circle shattered. Simoon says if he can't, then she can just take over his body, and there are no downsides for her, who has been trapped here for centuries. Hutrath says she wonders if there isn't a much simpler solution, as she snaps her fingers. Some demonic aura starts to grab onto his arms and legs, and she laughs, saying that she's going to play with him for as long as she's been trapped in here, saying surely he should be able to bear at least this much. Simoon wonders what's going on, because he can't even control his body anymore, and she starts to laugh, asking if he thinks he has the time to ponder. He's phasing in and out of consciousness, and she mocks him for passing out due to her mind magic, asking where his pride has gone. He finally starts to laugh as well, saying that she's just as noisy as ever. She asks if bluffing is the only thing he's capable of doing, saying that he doesn't even have the same mana, nor the same circle tier he had in the past. Simoon says even powerless, with his circle shattered, there's definitely more he can do. She's surprised as he completely disappears from in front of her. He says that he does not need to remind her that he has reached the 9th circle with black magic. Back in his original form, he tells her he would never fall victim to mind control, as he is now the one controlling her. As she sees him as a giant entity, he stretches his hand out towards her, completely crushing her. She then opens her eyes, having cold sweats, saying that she knew it from the start, and that he sure is quite entertaining, but to think that he'd actually have reached the 9th circle in the end. Simoon asks if she doesn't believe him, saying he can show her more. She says that's enough, and simply meant that despite reaching that level, it seems like he was unable to change the world. He tells her that it's not over yet. In the end, he will still accomplish his goal. She starts to smirk, saying she doesn't know how well he'll be able to make use of her power, but if it's him, he'd be able to reach the 9th circle again. Simoon says of course, as she walks up, putting her hand around his neck, saying that he seems quite confident. Even if she inhabits his body, the 6th or 7th circle would suffice, and she'll leave him to crush the world, as she leans closer, placing her head on his chest, starting to fade out into pure demonic energy. Simoon says that he guesses he's going to have to work hard so that he doesn't disappoint her. She says, of course, while looking up at him, and then tells him that he can't fail this time. He then snaps out of it, back into reality, still physically tired from that. He sticks his hand out using a spell called Dark Flame, shooting it out at the wall. He says it looks like it's only at the 3rd circle, but still, just having a foundation is already huge, so it's more than enough. Maybe it's because it's purified demonic energy, but the color is different from before, and if Utrath wanted to, she would have been able to take control of his body just fine. He'll have to make good on her expectations. Simoon already knew the theory and enlightenment behind each circle, so going up to the 9th circle won't be a problem now. However, in order to gather enough demonic energy for that, it's going to take a long time, so he might as well get started immediately. He places his hand on the wall, doing the same formation as before, opening yet another secret passage. Bro's house is too damn big. He starts to walk through it and heads to the middle of a very open room, and he talks to somebody saying they've been resting for 500 years, and it's time to get up and work. As he puts his hand in the middle of the room, he starts to activate a giant magic circle and says, right now it's your turn to help me, as his golem army is now starting to arise once more. Then it jumps to Count Monake's residence, as we see a man getting punched in the face. It's none other than the pilot, Mylon. Monake asks if he knows what he did wrong. Mylon says that he's sorry for losing, and he hopes he can forgive him. Monake asks if he really thinks it's all because of the match, saying no matter how he thinks about it, there's something odd. Mylon asks what he means, and Monake says even though the difference in performance between the Gigants is 5-fold, to lose like that, surely anybody would think he was working with Reyna in secret. Mylon tells him that he vowed his loyalty to him, and he would never betray him. He swears on his honor as a knight that he never did such a thing. Monake starts to grin, asking if his honor as a knight is all he has, and he better say something else before his head goes rolling. Mylon says he knows something about the other Gigant's pilot. 3 years ago, he faced off against him at the Imperial Gigant Arena, and he was a famous knight, as he's never lost. Bro really folded. Monake asks if he knows who he was affiliated with. Mylon watches the sword that almost killed him get put down, and he says they left not long after, so nobody knows his identity. Monake says he sees, and this means he has nothing else useful to say. Yet another sword has been unsheathed for some reason. Mylon is left confused, and goes to beg for his life, but ultimately gets cut down in the end. As Monake leaves his room, one of his men tells him that Reyna has remained here inside of Limer. Monake asks why, and the man says it's because she's unable to leave the refugees. Monake says the dude just needs to keep tabs on her, and he adds one more thing, to look into the pilot that was controlling Mur, and find out where he lives, because he will see this man himself and crush him, as he's looking at an army of Gigants. low-key foreshadowing that they might go to war. We hear Simoon telling somebody that ever since a long time ago, the Lacan household has thrived because of the nearby river and fertile lands. However, most have left now, leaving many houses abandoned, and there are already 3 villages that are on the brink of becoming ghost towns. We see him looking over all of this from a cliff, and he turns, asking somebody what they think about this problem, as it's none other than Dixon, who is tied up panicking. Simoon unsheathes his sword and starts swinging it around, and Dixon asks why he's doing this. Simoon says that he needs to stop playing dumb and this is all his fault. Dixon cries, saying there's nothing he could do about it, and he tried his best. Simoon raises his blade, asking if he really did, and all Dixon does is scream. Simoon says he would love to hang him in the middle of the square as an example, but the more he looked into his background, the more interesting he became. He's a talented individual recognized by the Empire, but he turned down the offers from other states and came here instead. Simoon then sheathes his sword and Dixon immediately thanks him. Simoon says that he asked for the last 10 years worth of finance books in order to see how he's been doing, and he actually brought it to him within a day without any errors, and he's pretty useful. Dixon starts to get all squirmy and blushes, saying that he's really good at arithmetic, and he starts just straight up gloating. Bro is loving the compliments. Simoon tells him that's the problem, and Dixon asks what he means. Simoon grabs him by his collar and throws him off the cliff, causing Bro to tumble down as Simoon slides down and they eventually make it to the bottom. Dixon asks why he's doing this. As he looks up, he's surprised to see some straight slums in front of him. He asks if these are really residents of their region, saying this is impossible because when he calculated the average, there shouldn't have been any slums like this. Simoon asks how it feels to actually take a look at the village yourself. Dixon asks what he means. Simoon tells him he can't summarize human life into numbers alone, and he needs to spend time with him and figure out for himself why the Viscounty is in this state, and if he can't find the cause, then he will no longer be working for him. Dixon asks if he's going to fire him, and Simoon asks if he would rather quit instead. Dixon immediately runs over towards the citizens and introduces himself as the accountant of the Lacan household. Simoon says that he's fine just watching the household fall, but there is a better time for that, and he needs to focus on improving this place so that he can raise his circle without having to worry about anything else. We then hear some people yelling at Philip asking if it's true that the debts were repaid by gambling. Philip says yes as we see him tied up with all the money behind him. The people of the manor start saying the image of the household is going to plummet if people figure out he gambled to get their money, and they ask Philip why he didn't stop him. Hans says they built up the reputation, and now it's just going to be destroyed. Rogers is also pissed. He starts grinding his teeth, calling out to Philip, who panics, asking him what he wants. Because he's scared of Rogers, Rogers asks if his identity was revealed, telling him to tell the truth. Philip says of course not, because he's not stupid, and then immediately recalls him telling Victor and the rest that he was from the Lacan household, and realizes he screwed up and says maybe he is that dumb. Rogers starts barking at him. Philip tells him that it wasn't during the games, it is the truth. Hans says that even if his identity was not exposed, it's only a matter of time before everybody would figure it out, considering Count Monache's intel. As he's the head of Lamer, so all news will reach him, and considering his evil personality, it's possible he may try to retaliate, and if he were to do that, there's nothing they could do, as he is a distant cousin of the Emperor. Rogers says that Monache has always expanded his territory through wars, and they've basically given him a reason to wage war against them. Hans says he wonders what the young lord was thinking when he did this, and Simoon finally steps up saying he can't listen to this shit anymore. They're all surprised that he's here in turn, and they ask where are the ones that were saying that the representation of the household is important, asking if they're really trying to ignore the evil deeds that are happening in front of them. Rogers says that they're just speaking realistically, as their military force is nothing compared to Count Monache's, and they just wanted to let him know that his decisions have now put the entire household in danger. This is the first time in the entire series so far we've actually seen Simoon genuinely angry since reincarnating. He asks if they earned their title of hero by kissing the asses of those in power, saying that he thought that they were given their title because they fought even in the most disadvantageous situations for the sake of justice. Hans tries to tell them that the people here are giving their all for the Lacans, asking how he could say something so absurd. Simoon immediately asks him if the problems were resolved, and Hans realizes they weren't. Simoon sighs, saying yet they were all making a big deal out of his gambling, but Hans tells him it's serious because if people find out he paid off his debts from gambling, the reputation will plummet, and Simoon tells him that this is enough, asking if a good reputation will solve the hunger in their territory. Their duties are to protect the people first and foremost, and the Viscounty's people are starving and leaving because the conditions are unbearable here, yet they still can't get their priorities straight. He walks past Hans, calling him a fool, saying he will not ever tolerate this kind of behavior again from any of them, as he is going to change it all from here on out. If they believe that his orders are not right, they can leave, and those who cannot follow his orders will all be dismissed. Hans starts to panic and chases after him, saying that the people have all served the household for a very long time, and he sighs, saying that he doesn't like people with narrow-minded perspectives and he'll show them his resolves. He immediately starts complimenting Philip, saying he did great on the journey, and he was very skilled as a captain. Philip's confused, asking him what he's talking about, and Simoon says it's only right for someone like him to be the knight captain, asking Rogers what he thinks, and Rogers asks him what he's trying to do. Simoon smirks, saying that it's simple, and he's going to have them duel, and the one who wins will be appointed as the knight captain. Philip starts to tear up, saying that he can never do such a thing as he's his uncle and the one who taught him how to wield a sword. Rogers tells Philip to be quiet, and says that he understands, and he hasn't had the chance yet to prove his skills to Simoon, and Simoon says that he hopes he's as good as he makes himself out to be. It then jumps to them at the training area, and Rogers says it's been quite a while since the two of them fought. Philip says it's been a few years, and he's still confused about what's going on, but starts to unsheath his blade, saying he's going to give it his all regardless. Rogers does as well. When he unsheathes his blade, the air immediately gets sharper around him, as they have their WWE stare down. Rogers says that they should try to enjoy this while they can. We see Simoon is also watching, and Philip raises his blade, saying he's going to attack. Simoon can tell that Philip is nervous, asking if this means Rogers is strong. Simoon says that since he has faced countless knights in the past as the Demon King, he can tell that Philip is actually quite strong. Philip dashes through using one of his signature abilities, the Phantom Sword, dashing right through Rogers. When he turns to look at the damage, we see Rogers has blocked it, saying that it seems he's gotten better as his skills have improved. Philip tells him that he's different from before as he immediately dashes back, and one of the thrusts goes right by Rogers' head. Rogers then watches as he gets dashed around, and he's surprised, saying that it looks like Philip has not been messing around with his training, as his footwork seems to have improved an exceptional amount. Philip then goes for an attack from behind as we see him leaping through the air, and Rogers says that it seems as if Simoon has praised him for good reasons. However, in order to pick up a blade that protects the family, it's still too early, as he grabs him by the collar. He slams him into the arena, saying that he needs to train a lot more than where he is currently at. We see Philip's eyes go completely white as he's starting to lose consciousness. Rogers then raises his leg and kicks him, sending him flying and causing him to land on his back. He wakes back up and grits his teeth, saying that he's not done yet, but Rogers puts the blade right to his neck, saying that he believes the match is actually over. Philip looks regretful but decides it is and surrenders. Rogers says that this is more than enough to show why he is the knight commander of their region, and Simoon smiles, saying that was pretty impressive. Then it jumps to some time later as Rogers is training the knights, and we see Simoon watching. Rogers says they better not quit as they haven't run much so far, and they all apologize. Rogers reminds them that the young lord is watching, so they need to perform exceptionally well. Simoon thinks about it, saying he never thought Philip would lose that easily, and Philip says that it's because Uncle Rogers is one of the top 5 swordsmen on the entire continent. Simoon says that if someone like him were to target him, he'd have no choice but to die, and Philip apologizes. Simoon then tells Philip that he intends on selecting him as his official escort knight, and he needs to make sure to do whatever it takes to fulfill that role. Philip is completely surprised to hear this and even starts to tear up. Tightening his grip, he says that he'll do his best, as we see him super happy, saying that in order to become the blade that protects him, he'll show him that he is worthy of his trust. Simoon says that he needs to go hurry up and join them in training, and Philip runs off. Simoon says to think 10 out of the 50 knights would be considered experts. He guesses they can only thank their warrior lineage for that. It's not just Philip, even Rogers is incredibly talented, and most people would wish to have even a fraction of what they own. If that's the case, it's clear why the family is in such a bad state. That night at the estate, we see Hans shaking, asking Simoon what he thinks he's doing, saying first he sold the statue, and now he's selling all of the family treasures, asking if he intends to throw away the honor of his family name. Simoon says that if it makes him money, then he intends to do exactly that. Hans puts his hands on the table, asking him why he's doing this, completely panicked, and we see him low-key holding back his anger. Simoon looks up at him, saying that the great hero Lacan, who died 500 years ago, is no help to them right now. Hans is startled, asking how he can say such a thing, and Simoon tells him to think about it, saying it's because of those old principles they held onto all in the name of honoring the great warrior Lacan that the family has fallen into this state to begin with. It's because of vassals like Hans that the family name has fallen to ruins. Hans says that's impossible because if it wasn't for the curse of the Demon King, but Simoon cuts him off, saying that attitude is another problem. They praise their predecessors for fortune and blame the Demon King for their downfalls. He starts to unsheath the dagger, telling Hans he would like to make himself clear. He intends to become someone greater than the warrior Lacan, so if he intends to stay tied to the family's old principles, he will erase them from the family's history, as he stabs the small picture of the hero. We then hear the door slam as Simoon leaves, and the other attendants run over to Hans, asking if he's okay. Hans says that he remembers the days when the young master was sitting on his lap and listened as he would read him stories, and he can't believe how much he's changed. The way he constantly visits the Demon King's castle and all these other changes, there's only one explanation, and he's sure that it must be the Demon King's curse plaguing the family. We then hear Philip calling out to Simoon, and he says just this one time surely he can take Hans' advice, and what he said just now was too much. Simoon asks if he really thinks this too harsh, saying that his thoughts are a little different. He intends to not give Hans any space to think and push back as much as possible, and they can talk about that later. Asking Philip if he's completed the task for him, Philip gets surprised, saying that his voice is too loud, and this is information he has barely managed to get from Hans. Simoon then asks where it is, and Philip looks around, asking him to be a little quieter, and then puts his hand up to whisper as it takes us to the dungeons. We see Simoon's boots as he approaches one of the gates, and he tells Philip this is different from what he told him, as the dude chained up looks low-key dead. Philip tells him that just yesterday he was alive and healthy, and the man asked him who he is. While exuding immense pressure, Simoon says that he can tell this is the strength of at least a fifth circle, rather, he's probably way stronger than that, and the old man tells him that he's not going to repeat himself and that he needs to answer his question. The man continues to glare at Simoon, and Simoon says that he's heard that he's been locked up here for a long time, but he seems just fine to him. The man recognizes his voice, saying that it can't be, and Simoon says that he can't believe the fiefdom's sole Iron Mage is rotting away in a place like this. The old man calls out to him, asking why he stepped in such a place for his sake. Simoon asks if he really thought he would do nothing while someone wasted away in his territory, and he heard that he's been harming himself by abstaining from food and drink. That's why Hans locked him in here. The man says that he lost consciousness due to the Gigan accident caused by his carelessness, asking Simoon if that was not the case, and he wishes for nothing more than to atone for that with his life. Simoon asks if he believes his life to be worth that much, saying that it was already confirmed that the accident was not his fault. The old man says if only he had examined it more closely, it never would have happened, so it was definitely his fault, and he wishes to be punished thoroughly for it. Simoon gets annoyed, saying that he can tell he's incredibly loyal, but he's just killing him with his stubbornness. He sighs, saying that it can't be helped, and since that's what he wishes for, then he'll do just that. He tells Philip to bring a sword. Philip's startled, asking if he's serious, and the old man closes his eyes while waiting for his punishment. Simoon starts to unsheath the blade, saying that since he asked for it, he shall give him exactly what he wants. He raises it into the air, telling the old man not to hold it against him, and slashes the sword forward, only to cut the chains off the old man, making him confused. He looks up, asking him what the reason is, and Simoon says it would benefit him more to use him than to kill him, and he can't stand taking an L right now. He's planning on working him to the bone, to the point that he'd wish he was dead, and it is his duty to pledge his lifelong allegiance to him and assist when needed. He's to swear it on his honor as a magician and engrave this moment onto his heart. He then tells Philip to take out what they brought, and Philip starts to pour gold coins out. The old man is startled by this, asking where all the money came from. Simoon says that's not important, and there's around 70,000 here. He points the blade at the old man once more, telling him that he needs to use this money to prepare to raise the magic tower, buy any grimoires he needs, and procure the necessary equipment to repair and manufacture gigants. Unlike the past lords, he plans to invest heavily in magic, and they need to make sure that such an incident never takes place again. The old man's eyes start to fill up with tears, and he apologizes for all the harm he has caused, saying he doesn't know if it's right for him to receive such goodwill. Simoon asks him what he thinks he's saying, reminding him that this is not goodwill but rather a punishment. He tells him to resolve himself as he does not intend to forgive him so easily, and he stretches his hand out towards the man. The man is speechless and then immediately starts kneeling. We learn his name is Mute, and Mute says that until the day of his death, he will devote himself to atoning for his sins. Philip says that Sir Mute's mana is incredible as he starts to exude it all through the room. Simoon smiles, saying that he has not an ounce of flexibility in his body, but that stubbornness of his is going to be really useful. He then tells Mute that there are 2 more Iron Mages now in the fiefdom, so he'll leave them in his care. Hans is eavesdropping, and he can't believe that he's convinced somebody as stubborn as Mute to help him, but for some reason, he can't shake this feeling of anxiousness that he has. We get a time skip of a whole month later. We hear everybody training, and we see Hans and the other assistants watching from above. Hans says that the family is changing. Philip, who was far from earnest, is now training harder than anybody else. Mute, who had hidden himself in shame due to his past mistakes, is now taking the initiative and training recruits. We then hear Dixon telling everybody it's been a while, and they turn, seeing him back from his journey. He says it's a relief they all seem well. Hans says that the fiefdom was in chaos searching for him, asking where he's been this entire time. He apologizes for intentionally causing them any harm, and he'll keep a long story short by just saying that it'd be better if he showed them all this. Hans and the others wonder what it's going to be, and then we see him asking how this is possible. The village we saw a month ago has been completely changed into that of a bustling city. Dixon laughs, saying that he can't have Hans so shocked from the beginning. He starts asking him if he sees the market over on the side. Unlike before, anyone is free to sell their wares, and this was decided together with the residents. Now everybody is discussing how to improve the fiefdom together, and the old, inefficient traditions are getting abolished. Dixon looks really content, asking Hans if he thinks the fiefdom is looking as it should now, with everything being more prosperous. Hans bites his lips, saying he has no choice but to agree. However, there is no denying that everything happening now is going against the last 500 years of the Lacan family's policies. Back at the manor, Rogers laughs, saying that he had the same concerns that Hans is having now, but he has let it all go, as Simoon has proven himself with results, so he has nothing more to say. He then sits up, saying it's time to go train, so he'll have to excuse himself. He tells Hans that it is their duty to place all of their trust in the young lord, and he tells him that he'll talk to him later as he leaves. Hans says that within that short time, everybody has already been completely won over by the young lord, and he's debating if he should succumb as well. 1 week later, it's pouring down rain, and Hans tells him that he's organized all the documents he had asked for him. We see the rain leaking into the office as well, and Simoon apologizes for dumping so much work on him, saying that he will be counting on him. Hans says that he will resolve the issue regarding the office leaks tomorrow, and if anything else comes up to let him know. He goes to tell him he could repair it himself, but Simoon tells him that his priorities are wrong. Those who have nowhere to shelter from the rain are overflowing in their fiefdom, and he should think about those people first. Hans clenches his fist, saying the more he comes to know the young lord, the more he finds that following him is the right thing to do. But still, there's something that he can't shake, and he has to get to the bottom of this feeling. Some other night, we see Hans dashing around tree to tree as he is following Simoon, saying that he secretly heads out every night. These regular visits of his are to the Demon King's castle, and he doesn't even want to consider it, but if the young lord were to be taken over by the Demon King's curse, it might be the end of the family. Simoon then stops moving, and Hans wonders what's going on, and maybe he was noticed. Then we hear other men running up, asking the young lord if he's surprised that they're here already. Hans says it can't be, as we see some bandit-like men saying they've already done it, and that the thing that they were tasked to do was so easy, it took no time at all. Hans says they were the bandits who were banished from their fiefdom for their plundering, so they've been living here and hiding, and there seems to be quite a lot. Simoon says that they work fast and he likes that, and then asks them if it's time for them to begin. As he's reaching into his bag, the bandits ask him if he's prepared a nice gift for them, and Simoon says yes, if they're ready for it. The bandits start to laugh, saying that they made sure to understand the books that he gave them last time. Hans wonders why they were given a book in the first place, saying it's odd, and they're going too far for him to actually hear anything. He wonders what Simoon is planning, but we see it's a lot more wholesome than that as they start crying tears of joy, saying they're no longer illiterate. Because he summarized the plot for them, they were able to understand even the hardest parts. Hans is completely confused now. A woman comes out with her child, saying, thanks to the young lord, even her kids can read now too. It turns out this is a sentiment shared by most of the town, as he has been giving them food and medicine as well. He's pretty much all of their family's savior, and they are more than grateful to him. Simoon just says that he's glad he can help them, however, there is a price to everything, and he's sure they're prepared. The bandits say of course, as while they may have spent their lives as bandits, they're not ungrateful animals, and he just needs to give them an order as they'll do anything he says. Simoon says that's perfect, and then he dumps the bag out in front of them, which is just a lot of gold and books. Han says that's probably around 10,000 peso, but he sees more books, wondering what he is plotting. The bandits ask what this is as well. They say they understand the books, but why the money? Simoon says the answer is within the books, and once they read them, they'll understand. Inside some of the books are actually resident registration and land transfer papers. Simoon says that those documents acknowledge them as official residents of his territory, and with them, they'll have the right to claim this as their land. He's going to build a town near here, and they'll be able to live there. The bandits are shaking, saying that they can't believe this, and that they used to just be mere bandits. They even betrayed him at one point, and they're already grateful to him for looking out for them, but after everything they've done, there's no way they can accept this because all they have done is steal from others in order to survive. They don't feel worthy to truly live here, and although they are grateful for it, the current residents will not accept them either. Simoon says that he's well aware, and he's not fully accepting them either. Even if they had no choice, plundering is a heavy crime. However, the fact that the Lacan family has forced them to do it is another crime he cannot forgive. Although they have stolen from others, they avoided hurting them, and he believes they still have a chance to atone for their crimes. This money is half a year's worth of payment, and from now on, they'll become mercenaries. If they have made others fear them, they need to prepare to die fighting on their behalf, as that is the true path for them to seek atonement. This is the future he can give them, however, the path they walk toward that future is up to them. That's why he'll put his trust into them, his people. The bandits hold back their tears and then start to raise up their weapons, saying they will lay their lives on the front line for him and protect his territory. Han says that the bandits were considered targets for subjugation, as that has always been a rule of the Lacan family. He wonders if what he's believed up until now was the right choice. He drops to his knees, saying what he's chosen to do was to ignore the screams of the alienated. He calls himself a fool. He can't believe he misunderstood the intentions of the young lord and questioned him. Now he understands that he truly intends to improve the territory, and he promises that he'll make up for this mistake by serving by his side, and we see him starting to cry. Simoon notices him, saying that he's finally let his guard down, and he really isn't knowing to deal with. The bandits tell Simoon to be careful on his way back and thank him once more as he leaves. Han sits there in admiration still. After a bit, Simoon sighs out of relief and says that was tough, and he assumes most of the people have been taken care of now. Then he starts to reach into what's left from the bag. As we see a purple aura, he says it's time for him to start the real work. Back at the Demon King's castle, he says that while he might be satisfied now, the problem is cost, as we see small little golem boys handling all the chores. He says he's managed to regain trust from his people, but it costs too much. He spent the majority of the funds earned in Lamer, and he needs a better source of income, and he guesses he'll have to resort to that, but of course, in typical fashion, doesn't say what. He then looks at two of the golems, saying that he's going to need two of them to help him out, as he's holding onto the thing from the bag again. The golems shudder, and we hear them screaming out as a bright purple light can be seen from the castle. Philip starts to tell Simoon that they've spent almost all of the pay they brought back from Lamer, and he knows it wasn't going to be enough to continue operating. Simoon acknowledges this, saying it wasn't going to be enough to maintain the territory anyway. Philip asks what the plan is now, suggesting they might need to go on another journey. Simoon tells him to shut up, asking if he's brought the records regarding mine development. Philip admits that there are only records of failed attempts decades ago, and although they've tried looking within their territory, there wasn't a single sign of a mine anywhere. Simoon asks for the reason behind incurring so much debt for something with such little chance of success. Philip explains that it was actually the only option at the time. They were in a horrible state due to a few unfortunate events happening within a short period, and while residents were moving away, Simoon was unconscious. Simoon sighs, saying that now he understands how bad the situation truly is. With the failed harvest season, maintaining the territory is impossible. However, something seems off to him, as there should still be a mine. Then he spots something and points out an area on the map, asking why there are no records for this area. Philip starts to sweat nervously, explaining that the Rocky mountain range was too difficult to scout because of the abundance of monsters. Even though they sent their knights there a few times, the monsters hiding in every corner of the region left them no choice but to return empty-handed. Simoon laughs, saying that means they weren't able to scout the region thoroughly. Philip starts to feel uncomfortable, hoping Simoon doesn't have any weird plans. Simoon grins, and of course, Philip tries to tell him that the place is too dangerous and insists on going with him if he's going. but Simoon understands that the mines must be there and heads to the rocky mountain range. We see Simoon looking up at something, saying that he thought Philip was overreacting as usual, but all he sees are monsters everywhere, even in the trees. He says it turns out Philip was actually right this time. Simoon notes that this is odd because these monsters should all live within separate regions, wondering why they are cooperating with one another. He sighs, asking if they've adapted to deal with humans. One of the monsters rears its sword back, swinging down at Simoon, who sidesteps it. Simoon then jumps off the ground as all the other infantry start to collapse on him. He begins to ready his magic, saying that they must think they have the advantage. Putting his hands on the ground, he creates a magic circle, saying from now on he'll be taking care of them himself. The mobs are surprised as golems rise from the ground, roaring and ready to fight. One of the monsters walks up and hits a golem in the head, but the golem completely brushes it off and punches the monster in the gut, sending it flying. Simoon comments that this is going to be a lot easier than he initially thought and praises the future mana stones for their capability. Some goblins from the tree start to launch at the golems, but they are absolutely manhandled. The golems are faster than expected, much to the contrast of their large size. But says that the monsters are swarming at them endlessly. He understands why the knights failed to clear the region. Dealing with all of them is difficult, but not impossible. Then, Simoon notices a special-looking monster in the back and says that it must be their leader. Simoon crouches down into a sprinting stance, saying it's his turn to join the fun. Using his magic to strengthen himself physically, he dashes off the ground, disappearing in front of the monsters and leaving them confused. He reappears behind the leader, already in the air, saying he doesn't have much time to waste. He shoves his hand onto the monster's head, casting a spell called Obedience. As the monster's eyes start to glow with a purple hue, it screams, and Simoon explains that this magic is actually brainwashing magic. A symbol appears on the monster's head, leaving the others confused. Simoon smirks, saying that their leader is now his subordinate. The leader readies itself to fight its own kind, and the tide quickly turns in Simoon's favor. The remaining monsters drop to their hands and knees, lowering their weapons in surrender. Simoon tells them that he won't hurt them if they bring their other leaders to him. We see some lightning off in the Rokia mountain range as we see another one of their leaders being brainwashed by Simoon. As he's holding it by the throat, it appears to be a goblin. It then grits his teeth and he lets go of it, causing it to drop to the floor. Simoon says he has a question, and the other goblins look scared. He says that he heard there was a place where dwarves would come and go, asking if they know anything about that. The goblins, with 2 orc leaders behind them, sit there completely terrified. Simoon looks at them, wondering if they aren't going to answer, but says maybe they don't actually know anything. The goblin leader, now brainwashed, starts to speak, telling him not to worry and kneeling on the ground, saying he shall guide him to that place, calling him master. Simoon smirks, saying that at least one of them seems useful. Some time later, he heads to a mine that has completely been caved in. Simoon asks if this is the entrance, and the goblins say that this is correct. Simoon says there are traces of some kind of landslide, but something is strange. He wonders what could be in there, as all of the monsters are terrified of this place way beyond reason, which makes him a little suspicious about what could be inside. Simoon says he doesn't know what it is, but he'll figure it out once he does. He starts to imbue aura into his hand, using his dark flame spell. He explodes the rocks open, sending the debris flying, and he starts to smirk, saying he knew it, that there was a mine within their territory after all. All the monsters still look completely defeated, and he wonders what's going on with them because he doesn't sense anything. He tells them they can all head back, and one of the orc leaders looks shocked. Simoon says in exchange, they should never bring harm to humans again and spend their time peacefully until he gives them orders. They seem happy that he's letting them go. He tells them to stay hidden, and he's sure they'll come in handy one day. He then turns back towards the mine, saying it's time for him to get started. We get a flashback to olden times, as we see some lizard people being turned into slaves. Simoon explains that in the past, with their overwhelming techniques and force, humans had oppressed other races. We see a lizard girl crying after getting whipped, and Simoon says they wished for only humans to be left on the continent. As such, Simoon, who is known as the Demon King, began to burn down one kingdom after another, rescuing the enslaved races. For them, he was considered their savior, as he stood up for them when nobody else would. Back at the Demon King's tower, we see him sitting on his throne as an orc kneels in front of him. Simoon confirms with the orc that there aren't even 10 remaining survivors of his tribesmen. The orc is silent, and Simoon tells his assistant to make a base for them in a different territory and make them do construction work. The orc then begins to cry, thanking him. Simoon asks if there are any more people he needs to talk to, and if not, they should wrap it up. We then hear a man saying that he seems to be the last one, and he enters the room. We see it's a dwarf who asks if it's alright to make an elderly man wait this long. The assistant asks how dare he show that attitude in front of their lord, but Simoon tells him that it's fine. He can't believe that a dwarf who possesses the greatest technology would come here, and on top of that, the energy rating for him is extraordinary. He asks the dwarf who he is, saying he never dreamed he would get to meet an ancient one. The dwarf laughs, saying Simoon seems quite perceptive, and it wouldn't be easy to tell him apart from his appearance alone. Simoon asks why he's come here, saying he doesn't believe even humans would be a match for them. The dwarf says that humans lack technology, and they indiscriminately destroy nature. Because of them, plenty of ecosystems have been ruined. Simoon asks if that means he's going to help him wipe them out, and the dwarf says that's right. If he cleans them up, then they can use their technology to improve his base. Simoon says that he too is a human, though, asking if he still plans to help him. The dwarf starts to laugh loudly right in front of Simoon for saying that. He asks him what he's talking about, saying he is clearly the Demon King. Simoon starts to smirk. Back to the present, Simoon now has a torch, exploring the mineshaft. Seeing that the dwarf mentioned there was a huge mine here, it looks like he was right. He thought that it would be a lot harder to fix up, but it seems as if it's going to be pretty easy. The dwarf's abilities really are unmatched, as it's so well kept on the inside. With the amount of ores here, as long as he has people willing to work as miners, they will have no worries from now on. He's then surprised by something, saying that it's odd that the construction ends here as we see it boarded up. He turns, looking around, saying after he died he heard that the place had been occupied by humans. He wonders if it's because of that. But despite people having worked here, there are plenty of valuables scattered around, and no matter how rushed they were, would the dwarfs that dearly cherish their tools have made this kind of mistake? He starts to have a weird feeling in his stomach, saying that something is off. The ground starts to shake, and he turns only to catch the glimpse of something red dashing past him, as it's burrowing in and out of the ground repeatedly. Simoon drops his torch out of surprise, looking up, saying now he finally gets why the monsters were terrified of this place. A shadow looms over him, and we see a giant worm screeching at him. He says it's definitely the master of the mine, and that it's due to this guy that the mine was abandoned. He apologizes, but it's bothering him, and it's time for it to get out as he starts to get ready to cast some spells. Simoon then immediately summons 2 golems to help him fight off against the worm. They start to have a WWE stare down, and the worm lets out a screech, alerting them that they are in its territory. Then Simoon stretches his hand outward, telling them to go ahead and take it down as they start charging directly at the worm. But the worm is insanely fast as it jumps in like a bullet, forcing the 2 golems to do their best to block it. The golems then begin to get pushed back, but they start digging into the ground, and they manage to actually stop it right before it hits Simoon. Simoon starts to glare at it, and then tells the golems to hold it down. As he leaps into the air, imbuing aura into his hand, preparing yet another dark flame spell, he shoots it out and it explodes on the worm. He says this should be enough to calm it down, but then is surprised by something, because he knows that his magic is weak at the moment, but what the hell is it made out of for his attack to not even leave a scratch? The golems also wonder what's going on as they all get launched into the air as the worm leaps towards Simoon. It opens its mouth, going to eat him, but one of the golem brothers latch onto it and imbues aura into its hand, punching the worm back down into the ground before it can eat Simoon. Simoon tells the golem it did good, and the golem is really happy about it, but the worm looks up completely pissed, and Simoon realizes this is bad, and tells the golem to watch out. Instead of going for Simoon, the worm leaps straight towards the golem, taking it straight into the ground. The golem lets out a roar, and some minerals begin to fall from where he was dropped into. Simoon asks how this is possible as the worm starts eating the minerals, and its skin begins to change to reflect that as it starts to evolve. Simoon says this is hella bad, because if it's just going to continuously evolve, it's going to make things way harder for him. Sometime later, Simoon asks where this thing even came from, because no matter what he does, this thing doesn't take any damage, and he has no other choice, and if he wants to defeat it, he needs to bring his gig in here and deal with it that way. The worm then throws a rock at the exit, completely blocking it, and Simoon starts to get pissed, saying he can't believe it's intelligent as well. The worm lets out a screech, going in for another attack, and Simoon says it's way tougher than he actually expected, and then he starts to think about it, saying if a monster of this size was wandering about outside, it should have left marks around the forest, wondering if he ever saw anything hinting at that, and says that it might only live in the mines, and if that's the case, there's no point in bringing the Gigan here, as it will be unable to fit into the mines to begin with, and this makes things even more complicated. And if only he knew its weakness, then he wouldn't have to struggle. He then senses something, as we see the golems holding onto it, low-key rodeoing this thing. Simoon says that the flow of mana was disturbed just now, and that must be it, and he tells the golems to buy him some time, as he starts running away, because if he's correct, there has to be something nearby he can use. He starts looking around the mine shaft, wondering where it is, and then finally spots it in the corner, and he says that this is a necessity for dwarves when mining, and it's an ancient pickaxe. He says with this he's going to have a chance, as he uses his physical strengthening magic, he readies himself, and then starts running up on the back of the worm, Shadow of the Colossus style, and raises the pickaxe into the air, saying with this he'll be able to mine anything, and he swings it down straight into the forehead of the worm. Simoon is confused because all he did is piss it off, and he wonders if maybe he didn't put enough force into it. He then loses his grip, and falls off the back of the worm, and it looks like it's going to land on him. Back at the manor, we hear Rogers asking Philip if he was aware that the young lord disappears every night, and Philip says there have been times when he would disappear without warning, and Rogers calls him an idiot, asking if his escort knight is unaware of his whereabouts. Philip starts to cry, saying every time he tried to follow him, he kept managing to disappear from his sight. Dixon says he's actually heard people say he visits the Demon King's castle, and Rogers sighs, saying he didn't think twice about it since he was unaware of the situation, but now that he heard about it, he understands why Hans is so worried. Hans then speaks up, saying he's not worried anymore, and Rogers is surprised and turns around. Hans says that he has decided to fully trust the young lord, even at this moment he believes that he is doing his utmost for the sake of the people, when in reality, Bro is just stuck in a slugfest with the worm. He starts to ready another spell, saying it might not have worked before, but now there's damage on the worm, it might have a shot. He shoots off a giant dark flame this time, and it starts to go straight towards the worm exploding on its head. The golems catch him, and Simoon says that this is seriously a problem, and he doesn't think he can handle another one of these worms, so hopefully that was the last of them. Sometime later after the fight, he says that, thanks to the worm, it looks like he's going to be able to save on manpower. As we see the golems mining the ore off of its head, I don't know if it's dead or not. Simoon then looks to his side, spotting a skeleton, as it's none other than a dwarf who is dripped out in some artifacts and his armor behind him. Simoon says that it looks like he tried to protect this place, and that he can respect as he gives him a proper burial, saying that he hopes this is good enough, as now he has a place to rest and leave all of his burdens to be at peace, and he hopes he understands that even if he takes all of his stuff, it doesn't mean he bears any ill intentions. If you've watched till the end, comment, Broly, to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.